Hello everyone, this is Grindcore with the final part of the Thin Red Line. A lot of you guys wanted another theory video, but those theory videos are really hard to make, and I already covered a broad aspect of things in the first video, so it would be impossible to do another broad video, broad theory video here. It would have to be very specific, and I wouldn't really know what exact topic to pick. But long before I got known from coaching and making training videos, I got known in the microstakes world on 2+2 by constantly posting crazy hand histories in the BBV thread. And a lot of those hands are really thought-provoking and contain drastic out-of-the-box thinking. So instead of having a theory video or something on a specific topic, I'm just gonna show you guys some of the most interesting hands that I've played in my career and explain my thought process in every one of them, and that should contain a lot of theory, and it will be hopefully it will open you guys' minds and help you see the value of having reads and allow you to think out of the box more. So the first hand here, this is the hand that I used in the quiz at the end of the second episode. I asked you guys what the weakest hand would be that you'd call the river with. So yeah, I'll go over the hand. I raised pre-flop and I got called by the aggro fish on the button, who is really loose pre-flop. And first I have two important reads on him here. He never folds to c-bets and he folds air to second barrels. So what I don't want to do here is c-bet the flop and then check fold the turn, because I'm always going to get called on the flop and then I just check fold the turn to his air. I either have to check fold the flop, immediately give up, or I have to double barrel him. Well, here I choose to double barrel him because I think on a board this low he will pretty much float. He will have random overs so often, and I'll get so many floats that will fold on the turn that it's good to double barrel here, and I have two overcards that I can improve to as well. So I double barrel him and I got called twice. So on the river I was planning to check fold, but then he instantly bet half pot, and my intuition just everything started screaming that I had the best hand, without really knowing why. So I stopped and instead of folding I started thinking about his range, and I started reviewing my notes on him, which were these. He raises top pair on the flop, so I can discount a 7 from his range. He raises a flush draw on the flop, so I can discount not flush draws or something, or king high flush draws from his range. He also folds air on the turn, so he can't have a hand like king jack or so. Also his snap actions are weak, and he bet really quick. He instantly bet on the river here, so he can't be value betting a 6 or so either, because value betting is a strong action, not a weak action. Although he tanks when he improves, and he didn't tank when he called the turn. He also didn't tank on the river, so he can't have a deuce, and he also can't have 4-5, which river to straight. So the only hands remaining in his range are busted straight rolls, which are 8-9, 8-10, and 9-10, and 8-5. And I beat all of those with my queen high. So I ended up calling him, and he had 9-8, and I was good. Alright, this hand's 2 loose passive fish limp, and I check 5-6 off in the big blind. Flop a gutter and I lead out. Pretty standard. There's really no point in checking here because I can full out random junk. I have okay equity against the majority of the calling range. One important thing when you're in the hand with fish, a fish who is 40 VPIP or so, he's playing every ace in the deck, but he's not playing every 10 in the deck, pre-flop that is. So the amount of ace-x combos in the range of a fish are much higher than the amount of combos of any other hand. So on this board, when I do get called, a fish is way more likely to have ace high than a 10. And against ace high, I have my 5 is a clean out, my 6 is a clean out, and I have the gutter as well. So it's really criminal to not bet out on this flop. You just have to take a step because you have okay equity when called, and you just fold out random better hands than yours, like queen 7 or something. So I lead out, and both of the fish call. Now turn at 5, I could bet for thin value, but I now risk folding out a 4. I'm not folding out a 10, and also I kind of want to keep ace x in the pot, because if the river is a 3, then they make a straight and I make a better straight. So I check and I hit the money card on the river, and the small blind instantly pots out. Well, when the passive fish pots out, he's value betting very strong hand. On a deuce 3 4 5 board, they don't value bet a 10, so this is always straight. And because fish have way more ace x combos in their pre-flop range than 6x combos, I have the best hand here like 95% of the time, or maybe 90% of the time. The only hand that I lose to is exactly 6-7 of hearts, because every other 6-7 will fall to my flop bet here. So a lot of you guys would probably just click the pot button and raise here, but when a fish has a hand that's 2 pair or stronger, they never fold, literally never. So every time that you know a fish has 2 pair or better, or top pair top kicker counts will work as well, I guess, and you can beat his hand, you should just go all in, because they won't fold. So that's what I did here. I just shoved, and I got 2 snap calls from both of them, and they both had the naked ace for the wheel. I mean, even small blind, who was the deepest with me, he snap overcalled. Well, really, he's when I shove here, I almost always have a straight and button call, so he always has a straight, and then his overcall is only to 3-way chop this small amount of dead money in the middle. Yeah, he just snap called the whole 400. So this shows that you should not be afraid to go for maximum value when you think you're coolering a fish. This hand was played against a friend of mine. We discuss hands over MSN, so we know a bit about each other's game. It was heads up, and we're 300 big blinds deep or so. Pre-flop, I'm not that great at heads up. I'm not sure if this is a good call this deep. I opted to call pre-flop with the speculative hand, and I flop a huge draw. I check, but he checks back. So on the turn I bet out. I bet out for full pot. That's what I've been doing all match, so I just keep that up. I don't really want to discuss that. And he raises me. Well, what can he have? He's not really representing much. Basically, he is likely either bluffing or he has a 4. So this would be a pretty good spot to 3-bet him and take it down. The only downside with that is that it's kind of expensive to 3-bet him, and also if he does have a 4, it allows him to come over the top. And another problem is that he will know that when I re-raise him, he will realize that he wasn't really representing anything. And because we discuss hands on MSN, if I had a jack in this spot and he raises me, or any hand with showdown value really, I would never 3-bet him. I would call to let him keep bluffing, because when he's representing a 4 or a bluff, why would I ever raise a jack or whatever there? I would be calling with those hands. So a 3-bet on my part is not really credible. What would be really credible on my part is calling that will represent showdown value, but the problem is that I'm out of position. If I'm in position, then I could just bet the river when check to and I would take it down. But since I'm out of position, I will just, now when I check the river, he will likely give up with his bluff, realizing that I have showdown value because I called the turn, and then goes check check and he beats my 5 high, so I can't really call. Yeah, it's I think 99% of you guys would be re-raising the turn here, which is definitely plus EV. But yeah, that has these downsides, that it's expensive and it risks him coming over the top. So what I did, I took an unorthodox line, and I got the same effect as on 3-betting the turn, but I got rid of all the disadvantages of it, because what I did is I actually called it, thus representing the showdown value, but then I underbet the river. So instead of having to re-raise to like $200 here or whatever, which would have been like 180 more, now I'm only calling 24 plus this, so there's only 49 more. So it's a lot cheaper, but it has exactly the same effect, because I will still fold out this air basically, and also against an unknown I would have to risk that this gets raised, but because we discuss hands on MSN and he knows I'm a deep thinker, and he's also kind of afraid of getting outplayed by me and owned, I don't think he will bluff raise this, because he knows that I'm capable of doing this as with the jack, with the intention of calling a raise. So I kind of level him into not bluff raising me here. So by calling here, I represent a hand more credible, and I still get into fold, but now for a much lower amount. So I thought that was a pretty interesting hand. This hand was against a regular, and he min raises the button, and people who min raise the button do so that they can call 3-bets wider. It's kind of a defensive strategy, because 3-bets will be smaller, and also the stacks are deeper, so position works more in your favor. So when he calls this 3-bet here, his calling range is wider than the normal calling range. It will probably have pretty much anything that can flop a straight flush, any pocket pair, all the suited aces, broadways. He's just not folding, he's only folding his pure trash to this 3-bet. So on the flop I c-bet, and he min raises me. Now what can he have? The flop is super dry, there are 2 aces on there. If he was trapping me with a hand like ace-king, he's stacking any ace of mine anyway, so why would he raise the flop? No, he would just call down to trap. Also if he had pocket 7s, he would just call down to trap, because he's stacking an ace anyway. If he has a hand like second pair, pocket 10s, again, why would you ever min raise? He would just call. If he has a hand like ace deuce, it's pretty much the same as ace king. There's just no point in raising. So I basically know when he min raises the flop here, he's bluffing, or semi-bluffing if he has diamonds, which is perfectly possible, because he'll have a lot of suited hands in his calling range there. So it's definitely a reasonable spot to 3-bet him, and then if he shoves, I would make a crying call, hoping that he has or actually knowing that he has the flush draw. Since a very good part of his range will be just air here, and I have the second not high card on this board, I only lose to king queen at this point, and even king queen has so much showdown value on board this dry, being the not high card, that I don't think he would turn it into a bluff. He would also just call it. So because I so likely have the best hand, I have so much showdown value, I just called here to let him keep bluffing. So that's exactly what happened. I check call turn and check call all in on the river with king high, and he had 10-9 of diamonds. Now another thing, if you know that he has a flush draw, say that you know that he has exactly 10-9 of diamonds, if you get it in on the flop, you will be a coin flip. But if you call here, if you get it in as a coin flip and then the flush draw misses, but he rivers a 9 or a 10, he gets your entire stack with this pair. While if you call, and if there is a diamond, I would still have check called my stack off, because I think he will try to represent that with all his air. So he will stack me when he hits his flush draw anyway, if I just call this raise. But now when he hits a 9, he won't stack me anymore, because if he turns a 9, he will just check it down. So I also lose less money this way. So I think calling here is far superior to re-raising. Alright, blind versus blind. This is played against a regular. He plays kinda tight aggressive, but his pre-flop calling range is a bit wider than that of most players, and he also floats a lot. He doesn't like folding to c-bets. So A bad strategy against him would be to c-bet the flop and then check fold the turn. So my strategy against him would be to either double barrel him with my air or to check fold the turn. And with bluff catchers I would probably c-bet the flop for value, thin value, and then check all the turn to induce the bluff. Here I double barreled him, and I check the river and he overbet shoves. Now let's think about his range here. The 6 paired, he could have a 6, but what does my hand look like? When I check the river, my hand looks kind of weak, and usually when people want to get value from a weak looking hand, they will bet pretty small. I think in his mind, if he shoves here, I would fold a hand like ace-5 or maybe even ace-10 or so. Also, if he has an ace himself, like ace-10, he's just not shoving the river. He would be betting like 200 or so, or 160. He would not shove. He would not be shoving. So I'm pretty much 100% sure this is not an ace. It could still be a 6 or a slow played both, but I think I can discount those a little bit. But he can have every busted flush draw, and the reason for that is that he floats the flop a lot. So if he has suited overcards, he's not folding. So even though the busted flush draw is only a backdoor flush draw here, because he never folds the flop, he literally has every possible flush draw in his range. So all those flush draws missing, and only a few value combos that he might not even play this way. This is a pretty easy call with anything that has showdown value. So in the hand I had king jack, and I was actually planning to check fold the river, but then when he overbet shoved, I could just easily call him, and was good against his queen high flush draw that missed. I think I made one slight mistake in this hand. As I said, my strategy against him would be, with the bluff catcher, would be to c-bet the flop for thin value and then check call the turn. In this case, on the turn I essentially have a bluff catcher, because when the turn is an ace, if he has a hand like pocket sevens, he's not gonna bet it. The only hands that he's value betting on the turn here are slow played monsters on the flop and top pair. He will bluff with all his floats. So king jack high is basically the same hand as 5-6 or pocket eights, because it loses to an ace, but it beats all his bluffs. So I made a slight mistake here by double barreling. I should have check called the turn with my king jack. Though one downside of that is it can put me in a really hard river spot, even though in raw equity I make more money on the turn by check calling. Let's say that he has 7-8 of diamonds. If I check again to him on the river, it gives him an opportunity to bluff me, and then I'll have to check fold. While if I bet again on the turn, he'll fold his 7-8 of diamonds, and I instantly take the pot right there. So double barreling has some merits. I think against this player, check calling turn would have been slightly better, but double barreling is certainly fine too. Alright, this hand is somewhat similar, only it wasn't against a regular, it was against a weekend fish, some guy who was just splashing around. Pretty high VPIP, pretty aggro, not folding to c-bets. So I raise in blind versus blind, c-bet the flop, pretty standard. And the turn is an ace. Well, that's not the greatest card in the deck, because he's playing every ace pre-flop, he's not folding one of them, and he's also not folding any ace to my c-bet, so he literally has every ace in his range, except maybe ace king, ace queen or something, which you would have 3-bet pre-flop. But because he floats a lot, he will also have a lot of air in his range, so I'm not check folding the turn yet. Though I'm not that happy calling. I think this is a call and then reevaluate on the river. Against a player who doesn't float as much, you have an easy check fold on the turn here, because they just have an ace or better when they bet the turn here. Or maybe the only bluffs that a guy who doesn't float much can have here are the gut shots, queen jack, jack 10, queen 10, and they have the gutter. And on top of that, if a guy has such a small bluffing range, he will very often fire again on the river with those bluffs. So, and on the river, I can't really check call twice profitably against a tighter player, but against this player I can check call. Anyway, so on the river I check, and now he overbets when the 9 pairs. So what is he really representing? well, if he had a hand like ace 5 or even ace 10, my hand, when I bet the flop but then check call the turn, I look a lot like half a king. If I look like a king, why would you go all in for value with ace 10 on the river? Because you'd expect somebody with a king to fold to that shove. It doesn't make sense to go all in on the river with an ace. Because he's not that great of a player, he might be going all in if he has a monster, just because he has a monster for this, without really thinking about ranges. So if he has pocket fours or so, he could be going all in. If he had a 9, he could be going all in. The thing is though, if he has a 9, he's not betting the turn when check 2, he's checking back for pot control. So in this can discount trips from his range. So the only hands that he's shoving for value here are boats, ace 9 and pocket fours, and maybe king 9. But he does have all these floats in his range on the that he didn't fold on the flop and then bluffed on the turn, of course, because that's his game plan. And now on the river he's like, shit, what do I do? Well, the 9 paired and he looks like a king, I'll just go all in. And he shoved. So I called and he had 6 high. Alright, this hand was played in the tournament. I rarely play tournaments, only the really big ones, the W Cup tournaments like that, because the buy-ins are really high, but the field is even softer than normal because of all the satellites and fame seekers. So yeah, those are pretty much the only tournaments I play, so I'm not that experienced in them, but this hand was pretty interesting. The cutoff here was, I'm not sure if he's a fish or MTT regular, because MTT regulars are so bad at post-flop play. I'm sure they're fine with 40 big blind play or so, but as you see here, we're really deep, like 200 or 300 big blinds deep. We're 300 big blinds deep, so I might be a little bit too easy on too easy with calling people fish, but he seemed to have some idea what he was doing, but he was pretty horrible. He basically never folds to 3 bets, so that's why I did 3-bet pre-flop against a guy who never folds to 3 bets. You want to depolarize your 3-betting range. So normally I would always call this pre-flop, but because he's not folding, I'm just going to 3-bet him for value. And also he's not really that great of a hand reader, and his post-flop play will mostly be first level thinking. So he calls me and he donks into me with a really strong bet, almost pot. Well, it could be a hand like ace king or queen jack or a set or something. Could be a flush draw, could be a total bluff, but I have a gutter to the nuts. I can turn a flush draw. My hand has some potential. I'm not gonna fold yet. We're way too deep. I'm not folding when it's only a very small part of my stack. So on the turn, here this is where he turns his hand face up. He is kind of a first level thinker. So on the flop, he really likes his hand. He makes a big bet. That's first level thinking. Good hand, big bet. Now on the turn, he suddenly makes a defensive bet. Now, what hand can you be really happy with on the flop, but you suddenly get really defensive with on the turn? The 6 didn't change anything at all, so it's not like he's afraid of the 6 with his queen jack nuts or something. The only hand that this makes sense for is a flush draw. And since he's a first level thinker, he won't be donking with 10x of spades because he has showdown value. Similarly, he won't be doing it with 6x of spades. Queen jack of spades, I have the jack of spades, so there are no combos with that possible. 7, 8 of spades, made a straight, so that also doesn't make sense for this bet size. So really, the only flush draws I know he has a flush draw, and the only flush draws he can have are nut flush draws. So unless he has ace queen of spades, I have the best hand here, and since he's never folding to 3 bets, he has ace 2s, ace 3, ace 4, all the spades in his range. So a lot of people would probably fold here or call, but since I have the best hand, unless he has ace queen. I'm dominating him. I'm a really big favorite, and fish also don't fold big draws. So I think this is a really easy spot to value raise him. So it's not a semi-bluff or whatever, it's just a straight on value raise. And then of course if he calls me I will check back on the river, because I beat all his busted nut flush draws. And if he was somehow value betting, he's never folding to another river bet. Really there's no point in making another bet on the river. Another bet on the river would be a bluff, and he's not, he either has the busted flush draw on the river or he did have a value hand, and that's never folding to a river bet. So this is I think the correct play is to raise the turn for value and check back the river, and that's exactly what happened. I raise, he calls, and then river goes check check, and big surprise, he had the nut flush draw. Alright, this is another tournament hand. Under the gun limper is a fish, but the button limper is a regular, tight aggressive player. So first let's go over the hand history. I raise, and only the regular on the button calls. I min bet the flop, get raised, and I triple check all on a horrible board with all the draws hitting and I have fifth pair, no kicker. So why? Well, this hand is purely based on pre-flop. When this tight aggressive player doesn't isolate the fish, but he overlimps, he really narrows his range down to small speculative hands. Hands that he doesn't think are strong enough for a raise, but they can flop something nice, so he's not going to fold them yet. So those hands are small pocket pairs and small suited connectors. Well, on this flop, if I check, I'm just letting him get a set for free maybe on the turn, or I give a free card to his flush draw or something. So checking is not that great. I could check to induce a bluff, but when I check on this particular board, this is a pretty good board for c-betting with all the big cards on there. So since he's a regular, he will probably expect me to be check calling this board when I check. So I don't think I will induce bluffs out of him. So all I do by checking is a free card, so I don't want to check. Well, if I c-bet big, because of his pre-flop range, he's gonna fold to the c-bet like 90% of the time, unless he has a flush draw. So yeah, if I make a normal c-bet, he will fold, and if I check, I just give him free cards. So the only way I can really make money out of him is if I induce some kind of spaz. So I min bet here, hoping to get some kind of raise out of his 4 or 5 of diamonds or whatever he has, and he obliges, he makes a very small raise. So he either has a underpair or some random 5 high hand or a flush draw. Now the turn the flush draw hits, it's kind of a bittersweet card, because now sure he can have flushes, but it's also a card that he will probably try to represent with his bluffs, because now he's looking at 5 high thinking, oh shit, he called, and then he thinks, oh, I can represent the flush now because I raised the flop. So yeah, he will have some flushes, but he will also continue bluffing a lot. So yeah, I did check call him twice. If he shoves the river, this bet, it's set up like a river shove, a pot-sized river shove I think. If he shoves the river, I'm not that happy. I think it's pretty close, but on the river, with the pot-sized shove left in his stack, instead of shoving, he only bet 4,000. And if he has a flush, there's no way that he would bet 4,000. He would always shove with a flush, especially when the board makes a 5 straight and a 4 straight. I would just never expect him to make this bet with an actual flush. So I think he has a underpair or some random 5 high suited connector or something here all the time. So I called him and he had pocket threes. Right, this hand. There's a little bit of history here, or actually a lot of history. The button here is a fish who bought in for the minimum. I think it was a 50 big blind minimum table. Might have been a regular table. But anyway, he bought in for very little, and he just ran like God for like an hour, and he ran a stack up to well over 1k. And recently he lost a big pot to the small blind, and shortly after that I just happened to get in 3 good overbet bluffing spots on the river against him. In the last 10 hands or so, I've overbet him on the river 3 times, and he folded 3 times. And since I was getting, my stack was increasing, and he was pretty deep as well, I wanted to set up a overbet value play, because in a single raised pot, if you make it 4x pre-flop, you pot the flop, pot the turn, pot the river, you only get in about 100 big blinds, but we're deeper than that. So in order to stack this guy, I would have to overbet. So I really want to set up a value overbet play, and that's why the third time that I overbet bluffed him on the river and he folded, I actually showed my hand. I turned off auto muck and I showed him the bluff. You could notice that after losing that pot from the small blind and slowly bleeding his money back down to this, he was starting to get tilted. You can tell when fish get tilted when they start making actions really quick, like the snap call. Snap call, snap bet. That's just that they get impatient and angry, and just a good sign of them tilting. And especially after showing that bluff, I could just imagine that steam is blowing out of his ears. That's how mad he is. So now that I've set up a overbet value play, if I normally with aces you would raise pre-flop to build the pot, because you want to build the pot so you can win a bigger pot. But if I can overbet anyway against a guy who's tilting, who won't fold any pair, even in a limp pot, if I overbet flop, overbet turn, overbet river, I can still get all the money in. So I don't have to raise pre-flop in order to be able to stack the fish here. So when I have aces, basically what I want is for him not to fold, because at this point, he was tilting so hard that I just knew if he flopped any piece, I was gonna stack him. Any pair, he's calling off the full stack, even if it's 4th pair. He just won't fold to my overbets at this point. So why would I raise pre-flop? Because if I raise, he will fold some hands that he will overlimp if I limp. Say 8-5 offsuit, if I raise, he might fold it, but if I limp, maybe he overlimps, and then when he flops a 5, I can just overbet and stack him. So yeah, it's really unorthodox, but I thought actually that limping aces under the gun here was optimal. And he did overlimp. As planned, I overbet the flop, and he just instantly shoved. And where he had top pair, so I would probably have stacked him anyway had I raised pre-flop. But if he had something like 10-6 offsuit or something, which he might have folded that to the raise, but call this. And then I'm pretty sure, like 80% chance that I would have stacked him with that or something. Alright, this hand, 2 fish limping, I isolate, and under the gun fish calls, the rest folds. I c-bet the flop and I get min raised. I had reads on this guy. With his monsters, his sets or whatever, he would always slow play, or he would make a pot-sized bet or a pot-sized raise. With his showdown value hands, he would always call. And I have re-raised these min raises a couple of times, and he folded every time. So I'm pretty much 100% sure that this is a bluff. Also, I've called these min raises with my bluff catchers in order to let him keep bluffing, and every time he instantly shut down afterwards. He wouldn't put a single blind in the pot after that. He would just check it down, instantly give up. Okay, so on this board, when he min raises, I know he doesn't have a pair, I know he doesn't have a monster, and fish treat ace high as hands that have showdown value, so he would also not min raise ace high here. So if he doesn't have a pair or an ace, then with my queen jack high, with the king being on the board, I basically have the not high card against his range, so to speak. So I know I have the best hand. Well, if I call here, I'm not making any more money out of him, because he's shown in the past that he shuts down after min raising. So all I do by calling is giving him free cards, so that sucks. So I have to raise him. If I raise him, if I make a normal raise here, he will fold. But that's a shame because I have the best hand. I would like to make more money out of him. So instead of just folding, calling, or making a big raise here, I did something very unorthodox and I min 3-bet him. Fish hate, or not even fish, just anyone hates folding to a min 3-bet. So this will very often get a spite call out of his air, and if he min raises and I call him, then he will just give up with his air, he won't bluff. But after I min 3-bet him and he calls, now he's way more likely to make a bluff, because he'll feel silly if he calls off this $60 bet with his 9 high and then check it down. People are just, after they call your raise, they feel like they have to bluff again. So I think by min 3-betting him here on the flop, of course, so this min 3-bet is for value with the intention of making him bluff the turn where I can check call him. Unfortunately, he didn't bluff the turn, it went check check. And then on the river he he made only a $30 bluff. But at least I got $90 extra out of him by min 3-betting. And I think on the river by check calling I made a slight mistake, because I was so sure of my read that he didn't have an ace. And he would also never bet if he sucked out on me with a 5, he would just check that down. So I'm 100% sure I have the best hand. So here I could have done something similar. I could have check min raised him on the river, hoping that he either spite calls or shoves all in or whatever. And then I would snap call any re-raise by him, of course. But yeah, I just I check called, unfortunately. And it was good against his check high. Alright, this hand under the gun raises, and he's a loose aggressive regular, also plays 5-10. Haven't played with him that much, but he's probably a capable hand reader. So button calls, I overcall. So far pretty standard. He c-bets the flop, and I opted to check raise him here. There's both merits in check calling and check raising. I'm not really gonna explain why I check raised him here, but if I'm using this check raising strategy here, for value I'm check raising the 2 pairs, ace 4, ace deuce, the sets, deuces and 4s, and also 3-5 suited for the nuts. And since the board is so dry, the only semi-bluffs on this board are gut shots. And why pure bluff if you have a couple of semi-bluffs in your range as well? So in order to balance that value range with some bluffs, with some semi-bluffs, I have to be check raising pocket 5s here, because that's one of the few gut shots on this board. So yeah, I check raised with pocket 5s, and he called. Now, when he calls, he very likely has an ace. I think he will fold pure air on the flop, and he probably doesn't c-bet second pair. But an ace won't really, as you see, we're slightly deeper than 100 big blinds. So we're like 130 big blinds deep. I think if I check raise the flop and triple barrel, I'll get him to fold an ace by the river. So the plan was to check raise flop and then triple barrel. So I barrel the flop, setting up a river shove, and now he raises. So let's think about his range when he raises. If he has a hand like ace king, when my range is either a bluff or a set or 2 pair, it makes absolutely no sense for him to raise with ace king there, because he's just folding out my bluffs that he was beating, and he gets action from all the better hands. So when he has ace king, he's not raising. Also with ace 10, he's probably not raising, because he still gets shoved on by the sets and the straights. He beats ace 2 and ace 4 now, but again he folds out my bluffs. So if he thinks ace 10 is strong enough to stack off there, he would just call and then call the river. Also my line looks like I'm gonna shove the river pretty much all the time. If he had pocket aces or so, it's retarded for him to raise, or if he had any sort of set, it's retarded for him to raise, because again he folds out my bluffs, which would have very likely shoved the river, and all the hands that he's beating, if he has pocket aces, my sets are stacking off on the river anyway. He doesn't have to raise. So even though I thought that he would only call this flop raise with an ace or better, now that he raised me on the turn, it has to be pure air that he floated on the flop and that he now has to raise me with in order to win the pot. So if he has air, then pocket fives is the best hand. So I called it, and then river went check check, and I beat his 9 high. I did make a mistake this hand though. That was this turn call. When my range looks like either a monster or a bluff, after I call this raise, it doesn't look like I'm bluffing anymore, of course. So now in his eyes I will have only monsters. So when I call this raise, he will never bluff me on the river. So I don't induce another bet out of him on the river. And if he's always going to check back the river, then basically what I do by calling here is giving him a free card. And since my hand is pretty vulnerable, it's only pocket fives. If he has a hand like Queen Jack on the turn, he has roughly 20% equity. So I just give him 20% of the pot for free. So what I should have done on the turn instead of calling is shovel in for protection. But I didn't, because I was timing out. I was really thinking about his range, and I saw I had 1 second left, so in panic I just clicked the call button here. If iPoker had a time bank, or if I was playing fewer tables or something, I would probably have come to the right conclusion that this should have been a shove. But at least it didn't fold. I called him. Alright, this hand was played at 10-20 against a regular, and I raise Jack 3 suited, c-bet the flop, and he raises me. Now I'm not really gonna explain why, but my reads on him, based on the previous hands that we played, the dynamics and everything, I just didn't think that he would have a value range here. The dynamics were such that if he had a strong hand here, he would definitely trap me. If he had an overpair, set, 2-pair, whatever, he would just be calling, not raising me here. So his raise is either a pure bluff raise, or it's a semi-bluff. So I could 3-bet him here, but that will just allow him to shove over the top with his semi-bluffs, which he probably will, because I'm not representing that much and my image wasn't that great. So 3-betting is not that great, but I don't really want to fold either, because I know he's bluffing. So I thought of a very unorthodox line, which I think would work really well here. I can call this raise out of position and then underbet donk into him on the turn, which will very likely call a raise, like 95% of the time, because all the semi-bluffs on this board are unpaired. He will, with the semi-bluffing hands, he will always raise me on the turn. Also with his pure air hands, he will be, if he had showdown value like ace high, I think he would rather float me than bluff raise me on the flop. So he will very likely have very poor showdown value, and if you have poor showdown value, you generally don't call these underbets. You will raise them because they annoy you, and it's just rage inducing when somebody underbets into you. So I think he will raise me on the turn pretty much all the time, and that will allow me to shove over the top on the turn. And he can basically never call unless he has he picks up a draw. Like if he has 6-8 of hearts and the turn is the queen of hearts, maybe he'll then be priced in. But in that case, I actually have the best hand because I beat his 8 high with my jack high. So the plan here was to call and then underbet donk the turn and shove over a raise. The hand actually played out a little bit different because the turn was a jack, and now I can actually beat all his hands. I don't have to bluff anymore. So as planned, I do underbet the turn to induce the raise. But now instead of having to shove over the top here, I can just call it and do exactly the same thing on the river. I underbet again to induce a shove from pretty much his entire range, and he jammed, and he did have the semi-bluff that missed. This hand, I got limp re-raised by the cutoff, and we're roughly 200 big blinds deep. I've been playing with this guy for like an hour or so, or even longer, and I have pretty good reads on him. He has been limp raising a lot. He has shown down 7-8 suited, and some other speculative hands in limp raised spots. He also has shown down premium hands for a regular open. So normally I would be continuing really tight here, Actually, I would call this with anything speculative, but hands that are easily dominated, like King Jack or so, I would just be folding. But here, I'm just pretty much not folding anything because his limp raising range ain't that strong, and we're 200 big blinds deep and we have position on him. Okay, so he pots the flop, I call, he pots the turn, and I shuffle in and I call. Both of these pot bets were snap bets. Okay, so the shove that I made here is one of the sickest value shove that I've made in my entire poker career. And it was based on two reads that I had on him. One was on his bet sizing, and one was on his timing. The bet size read that I had on him, on pot bets, was that they were polarized. His pot bets were either super strong hands or bluffs. Now, the reads that I had from other hands on his timing was that when he snap bet, he wanted me to fold. So now combining those reads, I know that he's polarized, which means that he has either a monster or a bluff, and he wants me to fold, which means that he doesn't have a monster. So I know that he's bluffing on the flop and on the turn. I know he's bluffing. If he had a pair, he would check or bet smaller. So I know he's unpaired as well. There are a lot of draws though on the board. There are 2 flush draws and a lot of straight draws. It's almost impossible if your hand is unpaired to not have a draw on this board. That's how wet it is. So with all my bluff catchers, it's better to shove for value / protection than it is to call, hoping that he bluffs again on the river. So the hand that I shoved here for value was actually ace high. I shoved with ace jack. Since I know that he's unpaired, I basically have the second nuts. I only lose to ace king, but I beat all his other ace x and I beat all his suited connectors and whatnot, king jack. So yeah, and he even called me with ace 9. I don't know what he was doing there. Probably just tilted. But yeah, that's probably one of the craziest value shoves I've ever made. Alright, this hand is against a regular. I 3-bet him from the blinds, and I have a couple of pre-flop reads on him and also a couple of post-flop reads. Pre-flop, he likes to 3-bet or 4-bet with suited trash, which is a big card and a little card suited. So hands like queen deuce suited, queen 3 suited, king 5 suited. Those are types of hands that he likes to 3 and 4-bet bluff with. Also he 4-bets quite regularly, but he also calls 3-bets a lot with hands like ace king, aces. He slow plays them a lot, so his 4-betting range is really bluff heavy. I also have a sizing tell on this 4-bet. Whenever he means business, he very often pot 4-bets or close to pot 4-bet. He would make it like 270 or so. So when he goes 226, I'm like 90% sure that he's 4-bet bluffing. And I'm also 90% sure then that he has a hand like big card, little card suited. So normally, because I'm out of position and there's a lot of dead money, I would be shoving all in here. But I didn't, because I also have some post-flop reads on him that will allow me to exploit him post-flop. This player triple barrels a lot, and he basically bluffs the river all the time when he has no showdown value. Also, he never makes a thin value bet, and he never bluffs with the pair. He never turns any sort of made hand into a bluff. So on the flop, the 9 and the 8 are pretty much not in his range, because he's 4-bet bluffing with big card, little card so much. With a hand like king 9 suited, he would just be calling the 3-bet. He would not be 4-betting. At least not 100% of the time. Maybe sometimes he'll bluff. So also he never value bets thin, so if he has an 8 or a 5, he's not c-betting here. So the only hands I lose to at this point are a 9, and that's about it. And even a 9, since it's a 4-bet pot, this guy really doesn't value bet thin, and since it's a 4-bet pot, he might not even bet a 9 on the flop. So I'm really sure I have the best hand, so I just check call, basically planning to call my stack off unless he checks at some point. Then I will shut down knowing that he has paired. So the turn is a 6. If he checks, I know that he hit a 6 or that he had a 9 or something and I'm toast, but he bets. So since he doesn't value bet thin or turn pairs into bluffs, the only hand that he's betting for value here now is Queen 7, Jack 7, King 7, because those have the straight. But he will keep on bluffing with pretty much all his bluffs, so against that range I'm still a really good favorite. Since it's only a little bit of money left, I could check shove for protection, but since he bluffs the river all the time without showdown value, I think I stand a better chance of I make slightly more money by just calling and then allowing him to shove the rest in on the river than by shoving the turn for protection. So I called again, I check the river. Queen kinda sucks because he could have queen deuce through queen 4 suited, but he never value bets thinly, so if he has a queen he would definitely check back, so this is an easy call. And as it turns out, he had big surprise, he had king 4 suited, which was basically exactly what I put him on. Alright, this is the last hand. It's blind versus blind against a pretty similar player as the one from the last hand. He has the same leaks that he bluffs the river with no showdown value all the time, but he doesn't value bet thin. Also, he's pretty loose pre-flop, so in blind versus blind here he has a really wide calling range. So I see bet the flop, double barrel the turn, and then I check call the river when he pots it. So about his range here. From the reads that I have on him, if he had 5 on the flop, he would very often make a very small raise. Not 100% of the time, but fairly often he would make a small raise. Alright, so when he pots the river, since he doesn't value bet thin, if he floated the flop with something like a king, he's never making a pot bet for value on the river. If he value bets it at all, he would be betting something like 600 or so. He would not be pot betting it. So this pot bet here is really polarized. So what hands can he be pot betting here for value? Well, flush draws he would pretty often raise on the flop. Also pretty often raise the turn when he hits. Or not necessarily pretty often, but at least a good percentage of the time. And also this pot bet, since my hand doesn't look that strong when I what is my check calling range here? It can't be very strong. My check calling range is a rivered queen or something, and he probably wouldn't make the full pot sized bet with the king, hoping that called by a queen. And even with a flush, he would very often bet slightly smaller. So this pot bet here is really a boat, like 5-7 or flop set, maybe king queen. He is bad enough that with a really big hand he will sometimes pot bet. Another tendency of him is that if he really had a nutted hand like a boat, he would overbet a river. So I can kinda discount boats as well. He's also never bluffing with ace high because that has showdown value. Will also very often fold ace high to the turn barrel. So I can discount ace high. He is loose enough to call pre-flop with 6-8 offsuit. He never folds that. And I think that's a hand he would play like this pretty much 100% of the time. Another hand that he would play like this 100% of the time is 9-8 offsuit. And both having a club in it, otherwise he would probably fold the turn without a club. So with his value range being rather questionable and heavily polarized, there are very few value combos in there, and sure, the amount of bluffing combos is also very low. It's only 2 specific hands that have a certain suit in them as well. But the thing is, I only have to be good 1/3 of the time here in order to bluff catch him here to be good. So I think I'm probably good like 40% of the time here, so that's slightly more than 1/3. So yeah, I made a pretty probably one of the craziest calls I've ever made. I called him with jack high on the river, and I was good against this 6/8 offsuit. It's a pretty thin call, but I think it was good. Alright, so that was the final hand, and with that is the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about any of the hands here, post in the video thread. And this was Grindcore signing off for DeucesCracked.